There is a moment, subtle, silent, almost invisible, when a woman stops seeing you the same way. No argument, no rejection, no clear reason, just a quiet shift from interest to indifference. And what most men never realize is that respect is not lost through words, but through position. Because in every social setting there is an unspoken hierarchy, and she is reading it with surgical precision. Not what you say and not what you claim, but how other men respond to your presence. And in this video, you will uncover the hidden psychological mechanism that governs her perception of you. You will understand why attraction can collapse in seconds, the exact behaviors that silently lower your status, and how to recalibrate your presence without force or performance. So watch carefully, because once you see this pattern, you will never move the same way again. Every environment you enter operates on a structure that is never announced but always felt, a hierarchy that forms instantly through subtle cues like who speaks and is heard, who interrupts and who is interrupted, who seeks approval and who defines the tone. And within seconds, she identifies your position, not logically but intuitively, as her mind asks one question. Is this man respected by other men or overlooked by them? Because that answer determines everything that follows. And here is the brutal truth. Respect does not fade gradually, it drops sharply. One moment of hesitation, one submissive reaction, one signal of seeking validation, and the entire perception shifts. You may still be speaking, but you are no longer being felt. And what creates this shift are not major mistakes, but micro behaviors. The way you rush to justify yourself, laugh too quickly, allow interruptions without reclaiming your point, or let your body react before your mind stabilizes. All of these are read as status indicators, and once detected, they cannot be unseen. And the most decisive factor is this: she does not evaluate you alone. She watches how others treat you, if they speak over you, dismiss you, or position you as secondary. Her perception aligns instantly, because in social dynamics, external treatment becomes internal truth, which is why some men are respected without effort, while others struggle despite trying harder. So the question becomes, how do you reclaim your position without force? And the answer is that high status is not loud and not aggressive, but controlled. You do not rush to respond. You do not react emotionally. You allow silence to work in your favor. And when you speak, you do so with intention. And if interrupted, you return calmly to your point, not to prove dominance, but because you naturally occupy space. And this creates a powerful effect where people begin to adjust to you. At some point, you will be tested through humor or subtle challenges, and the difference will always be in your response. Low-status reactions are defensive, reactive, and approval-seeking, while high-status responses are composed, selective, and sometimes completely indifferent. Because true authority does not react, it chooses, and this is not a technique, but an identity. If your behavior is inconsistent, the illusion breaks. But when your internal state aligns with your external presence, you no longer try to hold status. You become it. And when that happens, respect is no longer something you chase. It becomes something others adjust to. And now you understand the pattern most men never notice. The silent structure that defines attraction before it even begins. And right now on your screen, there is a video that reveals the next psychological layer that separates those who are merely present from those who are impossible to ignore. So watch it carefully, because missing it means returning to the same invisible mistakes. And if this shifted your perception, like the video and subscribe, because what you are learning here is how perception itself is engineered. There is a precise moment in any social setting when a woman's perception of a man locks into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet finality. It happens in seconds, and once it happens, it becomes very difficult to reverse, because what she is reading is not your words, not your intentions, but your position inside the social structure. And this process is governed by what psychologists describe as social status perception, a deeply rooted cognitive shortcut the brain uses to quickly assess value, influence, and safety within a group. And the reason this matters is simple. Attraction does not begin with emotion. It begins with evaluation, and that evaluation is happening continuously, even when nothing is being said. What makes this mechanism powerful is that it operates below conscious awareness. She may not be able to explain why her interest rises or falls, but her brain is constantly collecting data points. Who speaks with certainty? Who gets interrupted? Who others defer to? Who seems centered versus who seems reactive? And within moments, these signals are integrated into a coherent internal ranking, not in absolute terms, but relative to the men around you, because human beings are not wired to evaluate in isolation. They evaluate in comparison. And this is where many men misunderstand the game entirely, believing that personal traits like intelligence or kindness are enough, while ignoring the context in which those traits are displayed. Now here is where it becomes critical. The brain prioritizes efficiency over accuracy, which means it relies heavily on observable cues rather than hidden qualities. And this leads directly to what is known as thin slicing, the psychological phenomenon where people make rapid judgments based on minimal information, often within seconds. And surprisingly, research shows these judgments are frequently consistent across observers, meaning that if one person perceives you as low status in a moment, others are likely to arrive at the same conclusion independently, creating a compounding effect that reinforces the initial impression. And this is exactly why small behaviors carry disproportionate weight. A slight hesitation before speaking, a tendency to over-explain, a quick laugh that seeks approval rather than expresses genuine amusement, all of these are interpreted not as isolated actions, but as indicators of your internal state, and the brain translates them into a simple conclusion. This individual is uncertain, and uncertainty in social environments is often equated with lower positioning, not because of malice, but because stability and composure are unconsciously associated with leadership and reliability. But the most influential factor of all is not what you do. It is how others respond to you, because humans are inherently social learners, and we rely on group behavior to guide our own perceptions, a mechanism explained by social proof, where the reactions of others serve as a shortcut for determining value. If people listen to you attentively, give you space to speak, and respond with engagement, your perceived status rises instantly. But if they interrupt you, dismiss your input, or treat you as peripheral, the opposite occurs, and this shift can happen without a single direct interaction between you and her. This dynamic has been explored extensively in modern behavioral science, including research published in the journal Psychological Science, which demonstrates how quickly and consistently individuals form judgments about competence and authority based on brief social exposure, reinforcing the idea that perception is not random but patterned, not chaotic, but structured. And once you understand this structure, you begin to see that social interaction is less about performance and more about calibration. Calibration in this context means aligning your internal state with your external behavior in a way that communicates stability, clarity, and self-possession. Because the opposite, what psychologists refer to as status anxiety, creates micro-signals of tension that others can detect almost instantly. This is why trying too hard to impress often backfires, as the effort itself reveals a concern about acceptance, and that concern lowers perceived authority rather than increasing it. So the question becomes, how does one shift this perception without becoming artificial or forced? And the answer lies not in dominance, but in regulation. High-status individuals are not necessarily louder or more aggressive. They are more controlled. They speak with intention rather than urgency. They allow pauses instead of filling silence. And perhaps most importantly, they do not react impulsively to every stimulus, because reactivity signals that the environment controls you, while composure signals that you control yourself. Consider the difference between two responses to interruption. One person immediately stops, smiles nervously, and waits for permission to continue, while another calmly allows the interruption to pass and then returns to their point without tension or apology. The words may be identical, but the underlying message is completely different, and it is this message, not the content, that shapes perception. Over time, these patterns accumulate, creating a consistent signal that others begin to recognize and adapt to, because human interaction is not static, it is dynamic and responsive, meaning that when your behavior reflects stability and self-assurance, others unconsciously adjust their behavior in response, giving you more space, more attention, and more influence. And this in turn reinforces the very perception that initiated the change. However, this is not about control over others, it is about mastery over self, because any attempt to manipulate perception without internal alignment will eventually collapse under pressure, and pressure is inevitable. There will always be moments of challenge, moments where humor is used to test boundaries, where subtle competition emerges, and where your reaction determines whether your position strengthens or weakens. In these moments, the principle remains the same. Do not rush, do not overreact, do not seek immediate validation, because each of these responses communicates dependency on external approval, while restraint communicates independence. And independence is one of the most powerful signals of all, as it suggests that your value is not contingent on the moment, but inherent and stable. And this brings us to the deeper layer of this entire dynamic. Attraction, respect, and influence are not separate phenomena. They are interconnected outcomes of perceived stability. Because at the core of human psychology lies a fundamental preference for what feels grounded, consistent, and predictable in its strength, not in its behavior, but in its presence. When a man embodies this consistently, something subtle but profound happens. He no longer needs to assert his position because it becomes evident through interaction. He no longer needs to convince because he is not seeking agreement, and he no longer needs to compete for attention because attention naturally orients toward clarity and composure. At this level, the social environment begins to reorganize around him, not in an exaggerated or theatrical way, but in small, cumulative shifts. People listen a bit more closely, interruptions decrease, responses become more considered, and the overall tone of interaction changes. And within this environment, perception stabilizes in his favor, not temporarily, but as a consistent pattern. And this is the point where most transformations fail, because many attempt to replicate the external behaviors without addressing the internal foundation, leading to inconsistency. And inconsistency is quickly detected, breaking the illusion and returning perception to its original state. But when the internal and external are aligned, behavior becomes natural rather than calculated, and perception becomes stable rather than fluctuating. So what begins as awareness evolves into control. What begins as effort becomes habit, and what begins as strategy becomes identity. And once it reaches this stage, the entire dynamic shifts permanently, because you are no longer reacting to the social hierarchy, you are influencing it simply by how you exist within it. And as this understanding settles, something else becomes clear. Most people are unaware of these patterns. They operate within them unconsciously, repeating behaviors that reinforce their position without ever questioning why. But now you are no longer in that category because you have seen the structure beneath the surface. You have understood the mechanisms that drive perception, and you have the ability to adjust in real time. And right now, as this awareness sharpens, there is a deeper layer waiting for you, the layer that explains not just how you are perceived, but how connection itself is formed and sustained under pressure. And it is already on your screen, because the next video will take you beyond social positioning into psychological depth that most never reach. So stay with it, continue, and refine what you have just begun to understand. Because once this becomes part of how you move through the world, everything else begins to align naturally. Before you judge her, understand this. Attraction isn't built on what could be. It's built on what is already undeniable. Power feels safe. Potential feels uncertain. And in a world where uncertainty costs too much, she won't wait to find out. Now, look at your screen. The truth you've been avoiding is about to be revealed. The dark psychology of attraction. Why women choose power over potential.